Welcome, everyone. This is the full story of one of Rome's most enduring legions, Legio First Adiutrix. Born in the chaos of Nero's reign, this legion was raised not in the fields of training, but in the belly of the Roman fleet, forged by fire and thrust straight into civil war. From the freezing waters of the Danube to the scorching deserts of Parthia, from defending the heart of the empire to crushing revolts within it, Legio First Adiutrix stood firm through centuries of turmoil. It was a legion that bled for emperors, defied tyrants, and earned its name, Pia Fidelis, the loyal and the faithful. Join me as we march through the complete history of Legio First Adiutrix, from its foundation to its final stand. In the late spring of AD 68, Emperor Nero, facing the imminent collapse of his rule at the age of 30, took the unprecedented step of recruiting sailors from the Roman fleet at Misenum, located on Italy's eastern coast, to form a new legion. This decision reflected the desperate circumstances of his reign, yet it ultimately proved ineffective. The sailors either could not or would not secure his position. As support for Nero crumbled, both the Praetorian Guard and his German bodyguard abandoned him. The Senate, having declared him an enemy of the state, ordered his arrest. On June 9th, Nero is believed to have taken his own life. By this time, the Senate had already acknowledged the claim of Sulpicius Galba, the 70-year-old governor of Nearer Spain, as the new emperor. In the autumn of AD 68, Galba advanced toward Rome, accompanied by a newly formed 7th Legion raised in Spain and a substantial cavalry force. While Nero's reign had ended, the legion of sailors he had raised remained stationed in Rome, awaiting further developments. Unlike formally established legions, this unit had not been granted an eagle and standards, symbols of official recognition. Nevertheless, the sailors were determined to have their status legitimized, as such recognition would also grant them Roman citizenship. By October, Galba had arrived in Rome to assume power. However, his entry into the city quickly descended into disorder. 3 miles outside Rome, he was met by thousands of Roman citizens who had gathered to welcome him. Among them were the sailors, eager to present their case. Yet Galba dismissed their appeals, refusing to engage with them directly and deferring their request to a later time. This response only heightened their frustration. Determined to be heard, they obstructed others from approaching the emperor and continued following him, loudly demanding recognition. The sight of the sailors brandishing swords unsettled Galba. As his column neared the Milvian Bridge over the Tiber River, he ordered his cavalry to charge through the crowd. The vast majority of the sailors were unarmed and stood little chance against the mounted troops. They were swiftly routed, with many cut down where they stood, while others were killed as they fled back toward the city. Tacitus later described the event as a massacre, claiming that thousands of unarmed soldiers from the unofficial legion were slain by Galba's cavalry. Writing more than 150 years later, Cassius Dio estimated that approximately 7,000 perished on the spot, with the survivors subjected to decimation, where 1 in 10 was executed. However, this figure is almost certainly exaggerated, as a full-strength Roman legion numbered just over 5,200 men, and there is no other record of such a punishment being carried out. News of Galba's ruthless suppression of his own men spread rapidly across the empire, further damaging his already fragile reputation. The brutality of the event left a lasting impression on contemporary observers. Plutarch, then a young man in his 20s, and Tacitus, still in his early teens, both recorded that Galba's arrival in Rome, marked by bloodshed and corpses, was a dire omen for his reign. Despite this violent setback, the surviving sailors remained determined to secure official recognition. The legion that Nero had raised from the fleet remained in the crowded capital, though it was now in custody and significantly diminished in size. The troubled history of this legion was about to take another turn. During his march from Spain to Rome, Galba had passed through Vienne, a prominent city in the Roman province of Narbonne, Gaul. Located on the south bank of the Rhone River, it had once been the capital of the powerful Allobroges tribe. By this time, Vienne had grown into one of the wealthiest cities in Gaul, proudly displaying its prosperity with an inscription above its gates, Vienne flor felix, Vienne is rich and flourishing. However, such wealth and open displays of success inevitably attracted the envy of neighboring communities eager to seize its riches. Between AD 67 and AD 69, the cities of Vienne and Lugdunum were locked in a constant state of conflict. Their rivalry dated back to the 1st century BC when Vienne had expelled Roman colonists, who were then welcomed by Lugdunum. Tacitus records that the people of Lugdunum sought to inflame tensions by encouraging Roman soldiers to attack Vienne. They specifically targeted the First Italica Legion, arguing that while Lugdunum had been founded as a colony for Roman veterans, the inhabitants of Vienne were outsiders. Faced with the threat of an attack, the people of Vienne took action. To defend their city, they raised a new legion. Vienne's primary goal was to raise a force capable of defending the city against attacks instigated by Lugdunum. However, its leaders presented their efforts as an act of loyalty to the new emperor, claiming they were forming legions to support the nearby First Italica Legion. As a result, the new unit was named the First Adiutrix, or First Supporter Legion, signifying its supposed role in assisting the First Italica. Several months later, when Galba passed through the province on his way to Rome, the people of Vienne likely presented him with their newly formed legion. Though it may have had a name, it lacked the official status, eagle, and standards of a recognized Roman legion. Nonetheless, Galba accepted the recruits and incorporated them into his forces as he continued his march. On December 22, in what appears to have been an act of clemency during the Saturnalia festival, possibly linked to his upcoming birthday 2 days later, Galba ordered the release of some of the imprisoned sailors who had survived the October massacre outside Rome. At the same time, he formally recognized the new legion by presenting it with an eagle and standards, officially commissioning it as the First Adiutrix Legion. Cassius Dio confirms that this recognition came from Galba rather than Nero. Because the ceremony took place on December 22, the legion would henceforth associate itself with the astrological sign of Capricorn. The first soldiers of the newly constituted First Adiutrix were the freed sailors, while the remainder of its ranks were filled with recruits from Vienne's local population. Just 24 days later, on January 15, AD 69, Galba was assassinated in Rome by a disgruntled soldier from the 15th Apollinaris Legion. In the aftermath, the Praetorian Guard immediately proclaimed Otho, the former governor of Lusitania, as the new emperor. Otho had marched to Rome alongside Galba the previous autumn, and the Senate quickly confirmed his rule. Recognizing Galba's unpopularity among the military, Otho moved swiftly to secure the loyalty of key forces. One of his first actions was to win over the fleet at Misenum. Tacitus records that Otho accomplished this by formally enrolling the remaining survivors of the massacre at the Milvian Bridge, who had been held in custody under Galba's strict policies, into the First Adiutrix Legion. By joining the legion alongside the recruits from Vienne, these sailors finally obtained the Roman citizenship they had long sought. During the winter of AD 69, the First Adiutrix Legion was stationed at Misenum, where it was housed in the quarters of the fleet. By this time, the legions stationed along the Rhine frontier had declared their support for Vitellius, the governor of Germania Inferior, making armed conflict inevitable. Less than 2 months after the former sailors had officially joined the unit, the legion received orders to prepare for its first campaign. A decisive battle was imminent. In April AD 69, the First Adiutrix fought on behalf of Otho against Vitellius's forces at the First Battle of Bedriacum in northern Italy. On April 14, AD 69, the forces of Otho and Vitellius clashed along the Via Postumia, closer to Cremona than to Bedriacum. The Othonian army, weary from a long and exhausting march, found itself at a disadvantage as battle commenced. One of the most intense engagements took place where Otho's First Adiutrix Legion confronted Vitellius's battle-hardened 21st Rapax Legion. Despite being a newly formed unit, the First Adiutrix fought with determination, managing to capture the Eagle Standard of the 21st Rapax, a moment of great symbolic and tactical significance. However, their success came at a cost. In the chaos of battle, their commander, Orphidius Benignus, was killed as the 21st Rapax fiercely counterattacked in an attempt to reclaim its lost standard. Elsewhere on the field, Otho's 13th Legion was unable to hold its ground against the 5th Alaudae, a veteran Vitellian unit. The tide of battle turned decisively when a contingent of Batavian auxiliaries, renowned for their discipline and ferocity, launched a sudden flank attack on the First Adiutrix. Overwhelmed and outmaneuvered, the newly formed legion was forced to retreat. According to Cassius Dio, the battle resulted in the deaths of approximately 40,000 men, a staggering toll that underscored the ferocity of the fighting. The shattered remnants of Otho's army retreated to their camp at Bedriacum, only to surrender the following day. Accepting their defeat, the surviving troops swore an oath of allegiance to Vitellius, marking the end of Otho's bid for power. Otho's reign was brief, lasting only 3 months before he chose to end his own life. Following his death, Vitellius entered Rome as the new emperor, and the First Adiutrix Legion was reassigned to Spain. However, like his predecessors, Vitellius's time on the throne would be short-lived. Later that year, at the Second Battle of Bedriacum, Vitellius's forces suffered a decisive defeat against the army of Vespasian, who had emerged as a powerful contender for the throne. While the First Adiutrix Legion did not take part in the battle itself, it firmly supported Vespasian's cause. The legion had not forgotten its treatment at the hands of Vitellius following the First Battle of Bedriacum, and its loyalty now lay with his rival. With Vitellius overthrown, Vespasian was declared the new emperor, bringing an end to the period of instability that had gripped Rome throughout the tumultuous year of the 4 emperors. In the summer of AD 69, Civilis, the commander of the Batavian auxiliary forces stationed along the Rhine, leveraged his knowledge of Roman military tactics to devise a strategy for defeating them. His first move was to create a diversion, drawing Roman attention away from Batavia and destabilizing their control over the northern provinces. Although the specific methods Civilis used to incite rebellion remain unclear, he successfully encouraged unrest beyond Batavia. The Cananiphates tribe, under the leadership of their chief Brino, launched attacks on several Roman forts, including Triectum. With much of Rome's military strength engaged in the ongoing civil war in Italy, the northern frontier was left vulnerable. In response, the Romans dispatched legions to suppress the uprising, but Civilis' forces proved formidable. Exploiting their familiarity with Roman tactics and the region's terrain, the rebels decisively defeated the Roman contingents sent against them, further weakening imperial authority in the north. Once Vespasian had secured control of the empire and stabilized the situation in Italy, he turned his attention to the unrest in the north. To restore Roman authority, he appointed Quintus Petilius Cerealis, a trusted relative and experienced general, to lead the campaign against the rebels. Determined to avoid any possibility of defeat, Vespasian assembled a formidable army. Several legions were immediately dispatched to Germania, including the 8th Augusta, 11th Claudia, 13th Gemina, 21st Rapax, and the newly raised 2nd Adiutrix. Additionally, the 1st Adiutrix and 6th Victrix legions were recalled from Hispania, while 14th Gemina was summoned from Britannia. Although portions of these legions were deployed to pacify other regions of Gaul and Germania Superior, the sheer size of Cerealis' army presented a significant threat to the rebels. The 1st Adiutrix was stationed at Mogontiacum alongside 14th Gemina. In addition to their military duties, the legion contributed to infrastructure projects, constructing roads, buildings, and public baths. Upon learning of the Roman forces advancing against him, Civilis recognized that Rome was now fully committed to crushing the rebellion. Realizing the futility of further resistance, he chose to make peace. However, the history of First Adiutrix did not end there. Soon, the legion would once again be called into action, this time against the Germanic tribes and the Dacians. In AD 83, the Roman Empire was under the rule of Emperor Domitian. Though his military policies were largely defensive, rejecting expansionist warfare, there was one notable exception: his aggressive campaign against the Germanic Chatti tribe. As early as AD 82 or possibly 83, Domitian traveled to Gaul under the pretext of conducting a census. However, in a sudden and calculated move, he ordered an offensive against the Chatti tribe. To facilitate the campaign, a new legion, Legio I Minervia, was established. This force carved through the wilderness, constructing 75 kilometers of roads deep into Chatti tribe territory, exposing the enemy's hidden settlements and strongholds. It was during this campaign that Legio I Adiutrix, long dormant, was reawakened for war. The Roman legions advanced with ruthless precision, devastating the Chatti tribe's lands before withdrawing behind the Rhine. Few records of the battles remain, but the early victories were undeniable. By the end of AD 83, Domitian returned to Rome, triumphant. A grand spectacle unfolded. He celebrated his conquest and claimed the title Germanicus, as though the Chatti tribe had been utterly crushed. But not all were convinced. Ancient authors mocked his triumph, dismissing it as political theater, an unnecessary war fought for personal glory. Their doubts were justified. For in AD 89, the Chatti tribe would rise again, playing a crucial role in the revolt of Saturninus. Yet, for all its controversy, Domitian's campaign against the Chatti tribe remains a bold episode in his reign, one that saw Rome momentarily tighten its grip on Germania, only for that control to slip away once more. In the years following his campaign against the Chatti, Emperor Domitian shifted his focus towards strengthening Rome's frontier defenses. A key aspect of this effort was the development of the Limes Germanicus, a vast network of roads, forts, and watchtowers constructed along the Rhine River to secure the empire's borders against potential threats. As part of this endeavor, Legio I Adiutrix, along with detachments from legions stationed in Upper Germany and Britain, played a crucial role in fortification efforts. Their construction activities extended into the territory of the Lingonins tribe in what is now northern France, further reinforcing Rome's strategic presence in the region. The greatest threat to the Roman Empire during Domitian's reign emerged from the northern provinces of Illyricum, where the Suebi, Sarmatians, and Dacians relentlessly harassed Roman settlements along the Danube River. Among these groups, the Sarmatians and Dacians proved to be the most formidable adversaries. In the harsh winter of AD 84 or 85, the Dacians, possibly under the leadership of Decebalus, who may have been known at the time as Diurpanius, launched a bold incursion across the Danube. The attack was devastating. The Moesian governor, Appius Sabinus, was killed, and the Dacians left a trail of destruction in their wake. Some sources suggest that Legio V Alode was annihilated during this assault, though the evidence remains uncertain. The historian Suetonius, while silent on the loss of a legion in this particular conflict, does later mention the destruction of a Roman legion at the hands of the Sarmatians. The Dacian invasion exposed the vulnerabilities of Rome's Danubian frontier and set the stage for future conflicts, culminating in the wars that would ultimately bring Decebalus into direct confrontation with the Roman Empire. The Dacians had to be driven back across the Danube, a task made even more challenging by the rise of their formidable new leader, Decebalus. Recognizing the gravity of the threat, Emperor Domitian acted swiftly, launching a counteroffensive and personally traveling to the region with a substantial force under the command of his Praetorian prefect, Cornelius Fuscus. In response to the destruction of the Roman legion in the region, Legio I Adiutrix was redeployed to Pannonia, where it established its camp at Brigitio. With disciplined precision, Fuscus led the Roman forces in a decisive push against the Dacians, successfully driving them back across the border by mid-AD 85. This victory allowed Domitian to return to Rome in triumph, where he celebrated his second triumphus, presenting himself as the defender of Rome's northern frontier. Yet the conflict was far from over. The Roman victory proved short-lived. In early AD 86, Cornelius Fuscus launched an ill-fated campaign deep into Dacia. Leading an army of 5 or 6 legions, he crossed the Danube on a pontoon bridge, determined to strike at the heart of Decebalus' domain. However, as the Romans advanced, disaster awaited them. At the First Battle of Tapae, Decebalus sprang a well-executed ambush, surrounding Fuscus's forces and striking from all sides. Amid the chaos, Fuscus attempted to rally his men, but his efforts were in vain. The Roman lines collapsed, and Fuscus himself was slain in the fighting. In a final humiliation, the Dacians captured the prized battle standard of the Praetorian Guard, a symbol of Roman prestige and power. This devastating defeat sent shockwaves through the empire, proving that Decebalus was no mere raider but a cunning and formidable adversary. The loss of the battle standard, or aquila, was more than just a military setback. It was a devastating blow to Roman honor and a grave insult to the empire's prestige. In response, Domitian returned to Moesia in August AD 86, determined to restore Rome's dominance. To strengthen Rome's position along the Danube, he divided the province into Lower Moesia and Upper Moesia, and reinforced the frontier by transferring 3 additional legions to the region. After a year of intensive preparations, the war resumed. In AD 87, the Romans launched a renewed invasion of Dacia, this time under the command of Tedius Julianus. Among the legions involved in these campaigns was Legio I Adiutrix, one of 9 legions deployed against the Dacians. Marching from Viminatium, Julianus led his forces across the Banat, advancing toward the iron gates of Transylvania on the road to Sarmizegetusa, Decebalus' capital. In a climactic engagement at Tapae, likely in late AD 88, the Roman army triumphed, avenging their previous humiliation at the very site where Cornelius Fuscus had fallen. Victory seemed within reach, but before the Romans could strike at the heart of Dacia, events elsewhere demanded urgent attention. A major uprising erupted on the German frontier in AD 89, culminating in the revolt of Lucius Antonius Saturninus, governor of Germania Superior. With Roman forces stretched thin, the final conquest of Dacia had to be postponed. Following the assassination of Emperor Domitian in AD 96, unrest spread through the legions stationed along the Danube. The soldiers, loyal to their fallen emperor, refused to recognize his successor, Nerva. Facing mounting pressure from the military, Nerva was compelled to adopt Trajan, a respected general, as his heir, an act that would ultimately secure stability within the empire. During this turbulent period, Legio I Adiutrix took part in a campaign against the Suebi, a powerful confederation of Germanic tribes. Their continued service and loyalty did not go unnoticed. Under the reign of Emperor Trajan, who ruled from AD 98 to 117, the legion was honored with the title Pia Fidelis, meaning devoted and faithful, a distinction that reflected both their unwavering allegiance and their battlefield prowess. As Rome entered a new era under Trajan's leadership, Legio I Adiutrix stood ready to play a key role in the emperor's ambitious military campaigns, proving themselves once more as a formidable force in the service of the empire. Although the Romans had previously defeated the Dacians, their power remained unbroken. Recognizing the continued threat they posed, Emperor Trajan turned his full attention to Dacia. After securing the Senate's approval for war, he prepared to launch a decisive campaign. By AD 101, Rome stood ready to strike. This war would showcase the full extent of Roman military ingenuity and engineering prowess. While 4 legions were already stationed in Moesia, poised to cross the Danube into Dacia, reinforcements were on their way. Legio I Adiutrix, along with Legio XIV Gemina, Legio XV Apollinaris, Legio X Gemina, and Legio II Adiutrix, marched to join Trajan's forces, strengthening the Roman invasion force. The offensive was executed with precision. 2 powerful legionary columns spearheaded the invasion, advancing deep into Dacian territory. As they marched toward the heart of the kingdom, they razed towns and villages, leaving destruction in their wake. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of Dacia. The Roman army, led by Emperor Trajan, crossed the Danube at Viminatium, advancing methodically into Dacia. Their march was slow but relentless, carving a path deep into enemy territory. As in the campaign of AD 87 to 88, the decisive confrontation took place at Tapae, the gateway to the Dacian heartland. Here, Trajan gathered the bulk of his forces for a ferocious battle against Decebalus's warriors. The clash was brutal. Roman discipline and superior engineering were pitted against the Dacians' fierce resistance and intimate knowledge of the terrain. According to the reliefs on Trajan's column, the Romans gained the upper hand, but at a terrible cost. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse, with bodies piling up on both sides as Roman legionaries hacked their way through Dacian lines, only to be met with counterattacks from warriors wielding deadly falx blades. Blood soaked the earth, and the air was thick with the cries of the wounded and the clash of steel. Then, as the battle raged on, dark clouds gathered overhead. A storm broke out, drenching the exhausted soldiers in rain and obscuring the field with mist. The Dacians, deeply superstitious, took this as a sign from their gods. Decebalus, sensing the shifting morale of his warriors, ordered a tactical withdrawal. Though the Romans stood victorious on the battlefield, the fight had not been decisive. Decebalus regrouped, retreating to his well-fortified strongholds in the Orustia Mountains, where he prepared to make a final stand. With access to the Dacian capital, Sarmizegetusa Regia, still blocked, Trajan's campaign was far from over. Between 9 and 11 legions are believed to have taken part in this monumental battle, and it is highly likely that Legio I Adiutrix was among them. If so, they would have fought on the front lines, enduring the full fury of the Dacian resistance and proving once more their unwavering loyalty to Rome. The road to victory was paved with blood, but the conquest of Dacia had begun. Following the hard-fought victory at the Third Battle of Tapae, Emperor Trajan chose to delay his final assault on Sarmizegetusa Regia until the arrival of spring. The harsh winter conditions and the need to consolidate supply lines made an immediate advance unfeasible. However, this pause gave the Dacian king Decebalus a crucial opportunity to regroup and devise a bold counter-offensive. Realizing that the Romans were entrenched in the mountains near Sarmizegetusa, Decebalus sought to force them into a more vulnerable position. He formed an alliance with the neighboring Roxolani and Bastarnae, 2 formidable warrior tribes, and together they plotted an ambitious assault on Moesia, south of the Danube. If successful, this strike would threaten Rome's provincial holdings and compel Trajan to abandon his position in the mountains. As winter deepened, the Dacian-led coalition prepared to cross the frozen Danube. Thousands of warriors, emboldened by the icy terrain, began their march across the river. But nature did not favor them. Temperatures had not been cold enough for the ice to solidify completely. As they advanced, the frozen surface gave way under their weight. Cracks splintered through the ice, and entire sections collapsed beneath the feet of the advancing horde. Chaos erupted. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, were swallowed by the freezing waters, dragged under by the weight of their armor and weapons. The survivors, shaken and disorganized, pressed forward into Roman territory, their initial advantage already diminished. Upon learning of the invasion, Trajan swiftly moved his forces down from the mountains, determined to meet the enemy before they could wreak havoc in Moesia. The first engagement occurred near Nicopolis, fought at night under the cover of darkness. This battle, though intense, proved inconclusive. The low visibility and cautious maneuvering of both sides resulted in minimal casualties, with neither army gaining a decisive upper hand. However, as the Romans received reinforcements, they tightened their grip on the invaders. Unable to retreat across the broken Danube, the Dacio-Sarmatian coalition was forced deeper into Moesia, where the terrain offered fewer advantages. The Romans, employing their superior logistics and coordination, gradually herded them toward a final confrontation. The decisive battle took place near Adamclisi, a rugged and unforgiving landscape that would soon be soaked in blood. The clash at Adamclisi was among the most brutal of Trajan's Dacian Wars. The Dacians and their allies, though outnumbered and weary from their arduous campaign, fought with the desperation of those facing annihilation. Their cavalry, composed largely of Roxolani horsemen, launched aggressive charges against the Roman flanks, seeking to break their disciplined formations. Meanwhile, the Dacian infantry, wielding their deadly falx blades, attempted to cut through the Roman ranks. The Romans, however, had learned from previous encounters. Their soldiers had been equipped with reinforced armor to withstand the sweeping attacks of the falx, and their tight formations absorbed the initial onslaught. As the battle raged on, Trajan's forces countered with calculated precision. Roman archers and auxiliaries rained projectiles upon the Dacians, while the legions advanced in disciplined waves, driving the enemy back inch by inch. The battle was long and grueling, with both sides suffering horrific casualties. The battlefield became a graveyard of warriors, the ground littered with fallen Romans, Dacians, and Roxolani alike. By the end of the day, the Dacian-led coalition was shattered. The survivors fled in disarray, their once bold invasion turned into a desperate retreat. The defeat at Adamclisi crushed Decebalus' hopes of turning the tide. His forces were decimated and his allies scattered. Recognizing that resistance was now futile, he sought terms of peace. In AD 102, Decebalus surrendered, acknowledging Rome's supremacy. As part of the peace agreement, he was forced to relinquish key fortresses, surrender his war machines, and accept a Roman garrison at Sarmizegetusa, effectively placing his kingdom under Roman oversight. The war had ended in a decisive Roman victory. Although Dacia remained nominally independent, it was now a vassal state, watched closely by Rome. But Decebalus, though beaten, had not yet been broken. His thirst for revenge would eventually lead to another, even more devastating conflict, a war that would ultimately seal the fate of Dacia forever. Despite his defeat in AD 102, Decebalus had no intention of remaining a Roman vassal. Though he outwardly complied with the terms imposed by Trajan, he secretly plotted against Rome. He rebuilt his army, fortified his mountain strongholds, and incited neighboring tribes to rebellion. Soon, Dacian raiders were once again crossing the Danube, pillaging Roman settlements and disrupting imperial control in the region. For a time, Rome tolerated these provocations, hoping to avoid another costly war. But as Decebalus's defiance grew bolder, it became clear that his submission had been an illusion. By AD 105, Trajan had seen enough. Determined to end the Dacian menace once and for all, he mobilized his legions for a second war. Unlike the first campaign, where Rome sought to punish and weaken Dacia, this war was waged with a single goal: total conquest. From the outset, however, the campaign proved arduous. Decebalus had learned from past encounters. Instead of engaging in open battles, he and his allies waged a relentless guerrilla war, ambushing Roman columns, harassing supply lines, and using the mountainous terrain to their advantage. The legions suffered heavily in these early engagements, struggling to achieve a decisive breakthrough. On more than one occasion, Roman detachments were lured into deadly traps, their disciplined formations shattered in the dense forests and steep ravines of the Carpathians. For a brief period, the war seemed to be slipping into another uneasy stalemate. But Trajan, undeterred, called for reinforcements. He tightened his grip on Dacia, establishing forward outposts and relentlessly pressing the offensive. By the end of 105, the tide had turned. One by one, Decebalus's fortresses were isolated and overrun. With their defensive network crumbling, the Dacians fell back to their last line of defense, the mighty stronghold of Sarmizegetusa Regia. By the summer of AD 106, the Roman war machine had reached the gates of Sarmizegetusa. Legio II Adiutrix, Legio IV Flavia Felix, and a detachment from Legio VI Ferrata formed the backbone of the assault force. Surrounding the fortress, Trajan's engineers began constructing siege works, systematically cutting off all supply routes to the city. The Dacians, knowing their survival depended on holding Sarmizegetusa, mounted desperate counterattacks, attempting to break the siege. The first Roman assault was met with fierce resistance, as the defenders, armed with their deadly falques, repelled the attack and inflicted heavy losses on the legions. The city's formidable walls, reinforced with thick timber and stone, withstood the Roman onslaught. However, fortune turned against the Dacians when a treacherous local nobleman, hoping to secure favor with Trajan, revealed the location of the city's underground water supply. Acting on this intelligence, Roman engineers swiftly located and destroyed the aqueducts that provided fresh water to the fortress. Deprived of water, the defenders' resolve began to falter. As thirst and starvation set in, Sarmizegetusa could no longer hold out. With supplies dwindling and no hope of relief, the city fell. Roman forces stormed the walls, overwhelming the exhausted defenders in brutal close-quarters combat. Decebalus and his closest warriors attempted to escape into the mountains, but Roman cavalry pursued them relentlessly. Refusing to be taken alive, Decebalus chose to take his own life, rather than suffer the humiliation of captivity. With its leader dead and its defenses shattered, Sarmizegetusa was razed to the ground. The once mighty Dacian capital was left in ruins, marking the end of an era and the final triumph of Rome over its most formidable adversary in the region. Following the fall of Sarmizegetusa, treachery once again played a decisive role in the final chapter of the war. Basilis, a trusted confidant of Decebalus, betrayed the Dacian king's greatest secret, the location of his hidden treasure. Buried beneath the waters of the Sargetia River, the vast fortune was uncovered by the Romans. According to Carcopino's estimates, the hoard contained an astonishing 165,500 kilograms of gold and 330,000 kilograms of silver, a testament to the wealth accumulated by the Dacian kingdom. The final confrontation of the war took place at Porolissum, where the remnants of the Dacian resistance made their last stand. Despite their determination, they were ultimately defeated, bringing an end to Dacia's struggle for independence. With the conclusion of the Dacian Wars, Trajan secured a resounding victory, expanding the borders of the Roman Empire and solidifying his legacy as a great conqueror. The newly annexed province required stabilization, and Legio I Adiutrix, alongside Legio IV Flavia Felix and Legio XIII Gemina, was stationed in Dacia to oversee its pacification. Their presence ensured Roman control, enforcing order in a land that had fiercely resisted imperial rule for decades. Following its role in the conquest of Dacia, Legio I Adiutrix was later deployed in Trajan's Parthian campaign in AD 115 to 117. This ambitious military expedition aimed to expand Roman influence into the east, but it ultimately proved ill-fated. Due to the fragmentary and scattered nature of the surviving historical sources, reconstructing the precise events and objectives of the war remains a subject of scholarly debate. Historians continue to debate whether Trajan sought the complete annexation of Parthia or merely aimed to secure Roman dominance over key regions. In AD 115, Emperor Trajan led the Roman legions in a sweeping offensive into northern Mesopotamia, securing the region and formally annexing it into the empire. This conquest was deemed strategically vital, as it ensured that the newly subjugated kingdom of Armenia would not be isolated by a Parthian counterattack from the south. With their momentum unchecked, the Romans pressed deeper into Parthian territory, capturing Ctesiphon, the enemy's grand capital. The legions then advanced further, reaching the Persian Gulf, a feat that marked the furthest eastern expansion of the Roman Empire. However, the campaign took a dramatic turn in AD 116. Across the vast Roman-controlled territories, uprisings erupted simultaneously, stretching the empire's military resources to their limits. Revolts flared in the eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, and northern Mesopotamia, but the most devastating was the large-scale Jewish rebellion, which shook Roman rule across Cyprus, Egypt, and Cyrene. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, Parthian forces regrouped and launched a counteroffensive, striking at key Roman strongholds. The situation escalated when Trajan attempted to besiege Hatra, a heavily fortified desert city that refused to surrender. The Roman army, despite its engineering prowess and relentless assaults, failed to breach its formidable defenses. Hatra's defenders, adept at desert warfare, launched deadly raids, harassing the Roman lines and depleting their morale. The unforgiving heat and dwindling supplies further weakened Trajan's forces, forcing him to abandon the siege. Sensing an opportunity, the Parthians, emboldened by Trajan's setback, struck key Roman positions. At Seleucia, Nisibis, and Edessa, Parthian forces, aided by local revolts, overwhelmed Roman garrisons. Roman soldiers, cut off and outnumbered, were either expelled or massacred as the tide of war shifted. Despite these setbacks, Trajan responded with characteristic resolve. Rallying his legions, he launched a brutal counteroffensive, crushing the rebellions in Mesopotamia and restoring some measure of Roman control. To stabilize the region, he installed Parthamaspates, a Parthian prince loyal to Rome, as a client king. However, the empire's grip on Mesopotamia remained tenuous. Weighed down by age and the strains of war, Trajan withdrew to Syria in AD 117, where he planned to renew the campaign. But fate intervened. Before he could launch another offensive, he fell ill and died, marking the end of Rome's most ambitious eastern conquest. His successor, Hadrian, would abandon Trajan's gains, retreating to a more defensible frontier along the Euphrates River. Thus, Trajan's Parthian campaign, though initially successful, ended in a precarious stalemate, revealing the limits of Rome's expansionist ambitions in the east. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, chose a different course for the empire, prioritizing stability over expansion. Abandoning his predecessor's aggressive campaigns, he sought to consolidate Rome's borders and maintain peace through diplomacy. As part of these strategic adjustments, Legio I Adiutrix was recalled to Brigedio in Pannonia, where it resumed its role as a garrison force. The following decades were relatively peaceful along the Danube, allowing detachments of the legion to be redeployed to conflicts in other regions. Units of Legio I Adiutrix were likely involved in military operations in Pontus and the Maghreb, reinforcing Roman campaigns beyond the European frontier. Additionally, historical evidence suggests that elements of the legion participated in the Parthian campaign of Emperor Lucius Verus in AD 161 to 166. During the Marcomannic Wars under Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Legio I Adiutrix played an active role in the conflict. From 171 to 175, the legion was commanded by Publius Helvius Pertinax, who would later briefly become emperor in 193. At this time, the legion remained stationed at Soni in Pannonia, but played a crucial role in the Roman campaigns against the Marcomanni in Bohemia. These wars were part of a broader struggle to defend the empire's northern frontier against Germanic incursions. Legio I Adiutrix, alongside other Roman forces, engaged in prolonged and arduous campaigns to push back the Marcomanni and secure the empire's borders. On the 1st of January, AD 193, a former commander of Legio I Adiutrix, Publius Helvius Pertinax, ascended to the Roman throne. His reign, however, was short-lived, lasting only 87 days and marked by instability. On the 28th of March, 193, while at his palace, Pertinax was confronted by a contingent of Praetorian guards, approximately 300 according to the Historia Augusta, though Cassius Dio reports the number as closer to 200. Ancient sources suggest the guards were enraged after receiving only half of the pay they had been promised. The palace guards and officials on duty offered no resistance as the soldiers forced their way inside. Pertinax sent Quintus Aemilius Latus, the Praetorian prefect, to meet them. However, Latus defected to the insurgents, abandoning the emperor. Although advised to flee, Pertinax chose instead to face the soldiers and attempted to reason with them. He nearly succeeded in calming the mob, but was ultimately struck down by one of the guards. Didius Julianus rose to power after serving as proconsul of Africa, eventually seizing the imperial throne following the assassination of Pertinax. However, his accession was not the result of legitimate succession, but rather a controversial bid for power, reportedly secured through bribery during an auction of the imperial office by the Praetorian Guard. This act provoked widespread outrage across the empire, particularly among the legions. Legio I Adiutrix, whose former commander had been Pertinax, was especially enraged by the apparent complicity of the Praetorian Guard in his murder. In response, the legion pledged its support to Lucius Septimius Severus, the governor of Pannonia Superior, who now laid claim to the throne. Other legions stationed in the region, Legio X Gemina, Legio XIV Gemina Martia Victrix, and Legio II Adiutrix, also declared their allegiance to Severus. With this formidable force behind him, Severus began his march on Rome to confront Julianus. Severus reached the capital ahead of any significant resistance, and on the 1st of June, 193, he ordered the execution of Didius Julianus, just 2 months after the death of Pertinax, avenging the fallen emperor and securing his own position as ruler. Legio I Adiutrix did not return to the Danube frontier immediately after the fall of Didius Julianus. Instead, it was redeployed in the campaign against Pescennius Niger, the former governor of Syria, who had also proclaimed himself emperor in the wake of Pertinax's death. Once again, Legio I Adiutrix was at the forefront, leading the charge against this rival claimant. The legion crossed into Asia Minor and engaged Niger's forces there as part of Septimius Severus's Eastern campaign. The civil war ultimately culminated in AD 194 with a decisive battle near the city of Issus, where Niger was defeated and killed, solidifying Severus's control over the eastern provinces and further securing his claim to the imperial throne. However, the civil war was far from over. During his campaign against Pescennius Niger, Septimius Severus had forged a temporary alliance with Clodius Albinus, a powerful rival who controlled Britannia. Although they were political enemies, Severus granted Albinus the title of Caesar as part of a strategic agreement, effectively recognizing him as his junior partner in rule. In return, Albinus was given administrative authority over Gaul and Spain. This arrangement held for a time, But in the autumn of AD 196, Albinus learned that Severus had elevated his own son, Caracalla, to the title of Caesar, an unmistakable signal that Severus no longer considered Albinus his heir. The Senate, now fully aligned with Severus, formally declared Albinus an enemy of the state. With his political survival at stake, Albinus acted swiftly. He proclaimed himself emperor under the full imperial title Imperator Caesar Decimus Clodius Septimius Albinus Augustus. Mobilizing the legions of Britannia, he crossed the Channel into Gaul, bringing a significant portion of the British garrison with him. Albinus achieved an early success by defeating Severus's legate, Virius Lupus, and seized control of the military infrastructure in Gaul. He established his headquarters at Lugdunum. However, despite his gains, Albinus was unable to secure the support of the crucial Rhine legions, weakening his strategic position in the conflict to come. On the 19th of February of AD 197, Clodius Albinus confronted the forces of Septimius Severus at the Battle of Lugdunum, a confrontation that proved to be one of the largest and most decisive battles of the Roman civil wars. Although exact troop numbers and details of the engagement remain uncertain, it is widely believed that Legio I Adiutrix participated in the battle, continuing its unwavering support for Severus. Both armies were reportedly well matched in size and strength, making the encounter particularly fierce and prolonged. Unlike most battles of the period, which typically lasted only a few hours, this engagement stretched over 2 days, highlighting the intensity of the struggle. The battle saw multiple shifts in momentum, with neither side able to secure a lasting advantage early on. However, Severus ultimately gained the upper hand, likely due to his superiority in cavalry, which allowed him to break Albinus's lines in the final phase of combat. Albinus's forces, exhausted and overwhelmed, were decisively defeated. With Albinus's death, the civil war came to a close, and Severus emerged as the uncontested ruler of the Roman Empire. In recognition of the steadfast loyalty shown by Legio I Adiutrix throughout the conflict, Severus issued a series of commemorative coins bearing the name of the legion, an imperial honor that reflected both their valor and political importance. In AD 195, Legio I Adiutrix participated in a renewed Roman campaign into Mesopotamia, launched under Emperor Septimius Severus. During this campaign, Roman forces successfully occupied major cities, including Seleucia and Babylon. In early 197, Severus departed from Rome, setting out for the east, and the loyal Legio I Adiutrix once again followed him. He embarked at Brundisium and likely disembarked at Aegae in Cilicia, continuing overland to Syria. From there, Severus swiftly gathered his forces and crossed the Euphrates River, advancing into Mesopotamian territory. He made his way to Nisibis, a strategic frontier city that had narrowly avoided falling to the Parthians thanks to the efforts of his general Julius Latus. Following this, Severus returned to Syria to prepare for a more ambitious campaign. In the following year, Severus launched a second and more successful invasion of the Parthian Empire, reportedly as retribution for Parthian support of his former rival, Pescennius Niger. Roman legions, including Legio I Adiutrix, successfully sacked Ctesiphon, the royal capital of the Parthian Empire, and Severus annexed the northern half of Mesopotamia into Roman control. In recognition of this victory, he adopted the honorific title Parthicus Maximus, following in the footsteps of Emperor Trajan. However, like Trajan before him, Severus failed to capture the fortified city of Hatra, despite launching 2 protracted sieges. The stronghold's formidable defenses and fierce resistance prevented its fall, marking one of the few setbacks in an otherwise triumphant campaign. In AD 208, under the command of Legate Cornelius Valens, Legio I Adiutrix was deployed to Britain, likely participating in military operations against local tribes resisting Roman rule. The legion may also have been involved in the Parthian campaign of Emperor Caracalla between AD 215 and 217, although definitive records of its participation remain uncertain. The legion reappears in historical accounts during the reign of Emperor Maximinus Thrax. In the year 237, it took part in campaigns against the Dacians, followed by involvement in the civil wars of 238 and the siege of Aquileia in northern Italy. After the assassination of Maximinus and the brief joint reigns of Pupienus and Balbinus, Gordian III ascended to the throne. Legio I Adiutrix supported Gordian III during his Persian campaign in the year 244. However, on the 20th of February of the year 244, the young emperor was killed near Zytha, a city on the Euphrates River, under murky circumstances. He was succeeded by Philip the Arab. Following these events, the historical record becomes sparse. At some point in the 3rd century, the legion was awarded the honorific titles Pia Fidelis bis and Constans, likely in recognition of its consistent service during times of crisis. By the early 5th century, according to the Notitia Dignitatum, Legio I Adiutrix was still stationed at Brigatio along the Danube frontier. By this time, the legion had become part of the border army and was placed under the command of the dux of the province of Littoral Valeria, continuing its role in the defense of Rome's increasingly vulnerable frontiers. Through shifting emperors and civil war, the legion endured, not for glory, but for Rome.